Oh, hey, how you doing? My name is Josh with MoreDeadRecords. We're going to talk about one of my favorite things to teach people when it comes to mixing. It's not a compression trick, it's not an EQ trick, it's not any special trick that you're going to be doing to any one individual thing, but it's more of a way to look at mixing as a whole. How to run plugins as a whole, how to change things as a whole. Not only are we going to be going over one of my favorite mixing tips, but we're going to be going over one of my favorite songs that I've ever been a part of. You see, I sing, play guitar, mix, write, produce, along with one of my best friends, Damien, in the band Millreau. We released an album not too long ago called More Dead. If you haven't checked it out, please do so. We love having new people come by and listen to it. We fell in love with the album. We worked on it for about a year, recorded it over a couple months, and it's been the best thing that I've ever worked on in my musical career so far. We're going to be looking at a song today called Tear Down the Sun, which was one of the singles from the album. Now, this isn't just going to be a walkthrough of the song. This is going to mainly be about the mix breakdown and more so about this trick that I'm going to teach you. Let's get into it. Okay, the grand reveal. What is this mixing tip? What is this mixing philosophy? I call it angry hands. Angry hands in its simplest form, and because I made it up, I think, I haven't heard anybody else say this, even though I'm sure people do it, is when you open up a plugin and instead of just tweaking things lightly or looking up tutorials, you go in there and you jack knobs all the way to the max, or you turn mixes up or distortions up, or you mess with EQs, or you mess with the knee on a compressor, or you turn a tremolo up and then plug it into a reverb. It's exactly how I learned how to do things that I didn't know or couldn't find anybody to teach me. You open up a plugin or you open up something in your DAW and you get creative and you just start messing with stuff. And you realize that if you find an extreme on one end and another extreme on the other, that typically your ears are gonna know exactly where in between you wanna be. If you take a compressor and you turn the input all the way up or all the way down and you hear that it smashes it or crushes it, you might realize, hey, I like that crush sound, or I don't. So you don't need someone to tell you exactly what that is, you just pull it back. I think there's a massive want and need to know what the right thing or the industry standard thing is, but there are tons of mixers out there that are making platinum hits or making a lot of money off what they're doing, or even just enjoying what they're doing, who have no idea what's happening beyond their own understanding of what they like to hear. I've heard and seen some of the best producers in the world say that they just have a good ear, and that's their strongest tool. To have a good ear, you have to know what you like. If you know what you like, you're the greatest producer of all time. Indecisiveness can murder your creativity as a producer or a songwriter. This whole angry hands thing with production and plugins is not just spinning knobs, but it's extremes on both ends of anything to find where you fit in the center. Let's get into how this works. All right, so here we got our session for Tear Down the Sun. I've definitely progressed as a mix engineer and a producer since this was created. I'm sure some of you guys can imagine what it would be like to put together a song over a period of time and then one day kind of put yourself in a position where you're gonna have to display that to a bunch of people, and you might think to yourself, wow, that is a really dirty session and nothing is labeled, all the colors are wacky, there's a bunch of hidden stuff that I just minimized the volumes that people would never hear. I did go in and clean it up a little bit, and you're definitely not gonna be hearing the full version because this is the mix, not the master. So it's gonna sound different if you go check it out on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you find it. We're gonna go ahead and play through the song right now just so you can hear it. If you wanna skip that and get straight to the mixing tips, go here.
sinking deeper still. You wreck me, it's easy. You left me on my moments frame my soul.
God, I love that song. I really do. All right, so let's get right into it. So the mixing trick. I noticed that when I opened a plugin, I would kind of assume that I would know what I was talking about, or I would assume that I would understand what the plugin was doing, so I would just do minor bits. You always hear from educators and things, oh, you know, you gotta be careful. Every little bit counts. Subtlety is important. And while I completely agree, if you don't know what EQ is doing, if you don't know what a multiband compressor is doing, if you don't know what a saturator is doing, if you don't know what the bass knob on a guitar amplifier is actually doing to the sound, other than making it more bassy, you're not gonna know how to adjust it. Angry Hands is a really simple solution. Let's take the electric guitar in this track, for example. So how do I know, based on my knowledge at that time, that, you know, 189 is where I pull down? How do I know that the shelf at 2500 hertz is where I need to be shelving? How do I know I need to cut at 62? The answer is Angry Hands. All right, so this EQ is now completely dry. So if I play the guitar, the only way that I'm actually gonna know beyond textbook definition what's happening is to mess with the controls. And I'm not gonna get that by this. I'm not gonna get that by this. I'm not gonna get that by that. I'm not gonna get it with these tiny movements. And sometimes tiny movements are what you need to get something to sound the way that it needs to sound, to fit your mix or to fit the idea that you're going for. More importantly, you need to know what's happening. So if I do this, I just start fucking with stuff. And now I have this insane EQ curve that, to me, almost is approaching pleasing. I now kind of understand what's happening with this EQ. I'm understanding that, well, if I boost over here on the right side, you know, it's way more sizzly, and we would probably call that brilliance, or where the expensive frequencies are. If I pull down in the center or push up in the center, it's kind of giving it a little bit more audibility. Like I feel like I hear it louder when I'm pushing those mids, or it's more defined. I feel like everybody knows what happens when you boost the low end because of bass boosts in cars, or with rap music and hip hop, it's always like bass boom. You know, there's bass boom buttons or bass boost buttons on old CD players and stuff like that. If you boost the bass, it's just gonna slam the bass, and you like that. So now that I have that in mind, I can texture my EQ with small movements, because now I know what's really happening. So let's EQ this on the fly. You'll notice that when I'm operating in the bands, I'm actually pulling hard in one direction or the other to really force myself to hear what's happening, and then I make my micro adjustment. ended up with something like that. The biggest plus to the angry hands technique is forcing things in directions so then you have an understanding of what it's doing before you actually make a committed decision to something. Let's forget about EQ and move on to something different. All right, we're gonna talk about the chorus section of this song. Vocals are one of the hardest things to mix. One of the most difficult things to nuance, and in my opinion, the hardest thing to get the sound that's in your head out on to the DAW. Let's listen to this chorus in solo.
Wasted moments frame my soul. Bastard, liar, bury your soul.
All right, awesome. So here's the thing about this, just to preface. The vocals were recorded in an untreated room with an SM7B. There are two different vocalists, there are highs, lows, stacks. It is tuned lightly, but affected heavily with reverbs and delays. Instead of talking about what's happening to the vocals individually, we're gonna look at the stack as a whole by looking at the bus. For this achievable vocal sound, there was a lot of plugins involved. Small nuances for each, but it ended up getting where you need to go. And in my opinion, you can use as many plugins as you want and be as avant-garde as you need to get the sound that you need. It might not be right, but you'll probably do it better the second time. That's what learning's about. So on this vocal bus, we have a Fresh Air plugin, which is just kind of like a Brilliance plugin. We then have a UAD 1176, which is one of my favorite compressors of all time, especially on vocals. And then my absolute favorite vocal compressor, the Teletronics LA2A from Universal Audio. We then have a Pro Q that looks like it's shaving off the 74 down. So this is an emulation of a channel strip from SSL. This is an EQ compressor and such. I mainly use it as an EQ, especially on vocals. This is what I learned the angry hands technique on, and we'll go over that in just a minute. Next up, we have the Abbey Road Saturator, which is a great just grip maker. This one's a little wild and free for me, so it kind of gets away. Whenever I use it, I tend to go too heavy. So it's probably that I just don't know how to use it, but maybe I just haven't spent that much time with it. But it did give me the sound that I wanted for this. And it looks like one final EQ right at that bottom, and quite a funny sweep actually at the 12K mark. But hey, I told you we were gonna find some goofy stuff. So angry hands with vocals. Let's look at something simple and considerate with this Fresh Air plugin. So with this Fresh Air plugin, it's gonna be providing mid and high air, which air you can almost imagine as lift. You can almost imagine lift as boost. And you can imagine boost as enhancement. And you could probably go a couple other places with that. So let's zero this out. Listen to the vocals again.
Wasted.
And then boost them all the way up and see what happens.
Wasted.
There you go. Now you have a high and a low. So now let's go in angry hands and start spinning stuff and find a place that we want to rest.
Wasted moments frame my soul. Wasted moments frame my soul.
Okay, so listening to it without any background instruments, I ended up in about the same place on my high side, but way higher on my mid side. So now let's zero those out and hear it with the background music and see what we can do and what the purpose of this plugin might have been at the time. You can hear immediately as soon as I boost that, real heavy-handed on the high side, it immediately punches the vocals to the front of the mix. Let's listen to that one more time. All right, let's see what the mid side is gonna do. It's definitely boosting it to the front, but it's a little bit more pleasant. The high side gives a sizzle that just kind of, it probably interacts with my other EQs and compression a little bit worse, because you got to remember there is a signal chain here. I think the responsible thing to do would be showing you this without the signal chain, but we're talking in bits here. So it looks like I ended up in the center. That's like 20 points higher than it was at my original take on the plugin. But I like it. It pushed the vocals to the front. It kind of it got what I needed done. Let's move on to the next plugin and see what heavy-handed does for it. So I definitely want to talk about this channel strip. The thing about a channel strip that introduces this angry hands, heavy-handed ideal that is basically, you find your extremes on both sides and then find your resting place because you have a reference of what the extremes sound like, you can really taste it. If I have too much highs and I hear that and I don't like it, then I know I need less. If I have no highs, as in no boost, then I know I might need less or I might need more because it's too dark. Plugins like this are phenomenal for this because you can't see anything. There is no EQ curve to mess with, it's just knobs. And I have learned from producers who have cheat sheets where it's like, boost vocal at 8K for presence, or it's, reduce snare at 200 or 300 or 3K for less basketball. But that's too much to remember, too much textbook. Not that it doesn't work. For me, I gotta see it. And by see it, I mean twist the knobs. I gotta go in there and mess with it. I gotta learn on the job. So with that said, let's zero this EQ out and start messing with it and see what it does. And also, so we can kind of get an idea for exactly what's happening here, I'm gonna give you a tiny bit of instruction on how this EQ works. The decibel is how much you're boosting, and the kilohertz side is where you're boosting at. So you can imagine on EQ spectrum, if 8K is in a certain spot and you go to the right, you'll go further to 16, which is the end of your EQ. And if you back it up, you'll find yourself at 1.5K, which is way early in the EQ. Each one of these sections represents a different band of EQ. So you have your high mids, your low mids, and your lows.
Wasted moments frame my soul. Bastard, liar, bury your soul.
Okay, so I kind of dialed in a sound that I liked based on these. It was pleasing to my ear, but what's the problem? It wasn't versus any instruments. It was just, oh, I like the way the vocal sounds when I color it with this EQ that I can't see. Well, let's see what that sounds like when I add the music. So that's actually not that bad. I would say though, I definitely need to boost the highs to kind of get it punched through. But that 4.5 area, well 4.2 area that I boosted, I understood the words. I boosted at 1K, which I liked when it was raw. And it ended up actually pressing the vocal forward. And I boosted the lows, which gave it a little bit less of a sizzle that sometimes you don't want on a vocal. So let's go boost that high frequency and see if we can't get this to kind of sit perfect. I like it. Is that the final mix? No. Would I mess with that more? Probably, yeah, but on the fly, I like how it sounds. All right, and last thing, a compressor. Compressors are one of the hardest things to understand how to use in the first place, especially on drums. You can compress a vocal, you're gonna hear it squish, it's gonna get loud, it's gonna be even, that's great. When you're compressing drums, especially on a bus, that can be challenging, especially for rock drums. The very ending of the song, right after the final chorus, has this big moment where the drums are really slow, everything's really wide, it's supposed to be a breath of fresh air at the very end of a really chaotic chorus line. Okay, it's open, it's breathy, it has a lot of weight to it. Let's see what's going on the main track. So this is my kit bus that has all of my drums in it. Let's listen. The only two things on that drum bus are a compressor and a little bit of an EQ. The EQ is cutting off some low. Right in the center, there's a dot for no reason. Let's get rid of that. And it looks like there's a push and a pull area happening on the high side where I'm dropping the 11K and then boosting the 14K with the shelf, which is kind of giving it like a pinch. Probably getting rid of a little harshness by adding a presence at the end. But we're gonna talk about the compressor and see how you might use your angry hands to understand what this compressor is doing. Compression is hard. It's really hard. It's one of the hardest things I think that I ever had to learn about mixing, and I wouldn't even say that I'm an expert. I definitely can get it to do what I want nowadays, but I am not gonna compress everything perfect every time. It takes some trial and error. So the basic breakdown of this, you have your attack speed, your release speed, your saturation, your mix, your air, and your beef. This is the specific to this compressor. You're gonna find attack and release on every compressor and output and input and a threshold on most compressors. This one specifically has a beef control, which is gonna add a little bit of that heat to the lower end. It has an air control, which is gonna add a little sizzle to the higher end. Don't think of it like an EQ because that'll confuse you. Saturation, that'll also confuse you. And the mix, that's how much of this plugin is blended into the dry sound. Something that I like to do with drum buses is to not have the compressor on the drum bus beat all of the sound. It kind of gives it a little bit of a fresher light when you can still hear some of the raw noise. The attack on your compressor is how quickly the compressor will clamp down on the sound. So if I did this, as soon as I clap, if my attack is fast, the compressor will smash that clap and it'll be even. If I have the attack slow, when I clap, the compressor is going to take longer to close on it. The release is how long the compressor takes to let go of the noise and allow more through. Now your compressor is never going to stop noise from coming in, but it will smash everything that's coming through it. So let's start heavy-handing this with the drums playing solo and see if we can't hear what's happening as opposed to knowing already what's happening. All right, so I have a better idea of what's happening here. I will say of all of the methods of using angry hands, compression is going to be one of the hardest to hear. Even when you push things to their limit, sometimes, depending on the plugin, it isn't that big of a difference. Some plugins are designed to help you, not to hurt you, so they're going to be tailored to, even at their most extreme settings, still kind of do what they're supposed to do. Let's see if we can dial in an appropriate compression with this plugin. I actually kind of like that better than the original way that I had it. Now, obviously, I'm listening to this in solo, which you never do. Never solo. Always with other stuff, but this is for education. I like that it's breathing. Once the drums hit, it opens up. It doesn't clamp down. I'm still hearing the hits on the cymbals. I'm still hearing the hits on the snares. Let's put on a compressor that might be easier to mess up. All right, here we have the CLA 1176. Let's start listening to this as we spin the knobs. All right, now we're getting somewhere. When I have the input at 0, it is the most compression, the most squeeze that we could possibly get, which you can definitely tell. The biggest difference that I notice with any of the knob spins is the release knob and the output, obviously, because that's like your overall volume. The release knob is allowing all of the cymbals to hold their sustain, whereas when I have it on 0, they don't really sustain. Let's hear that. This is on 0. And all the way up. And frankly, honestly, it kind of sounds cool. I'm kind of into it. I would not use it, but it sounds interesting. My attack's at 0. When I boost the attack all the way up, let's see what happens. I barely even hear the impacts. I only hear like the sustained note. I don't even hear like the actual crack of the snare. If I make it 0, we'll see if we can hear that. I'm hearing it a lot more. The attack not slamming down on it so fast is allowing that transient, which is that hit, to still come through. Okay, when it comes to mixing, everything can be subjective or objective depending on how you look at it. If you have to crush your drums for them to sound good, if you absolutely have to have a slow attack and a fast release to get a good drum sound, you can say those are facts. But subjectively speaking, everybody's gonna be different. What sounds good to one person and what sounds good to another person are gonna be entirely separate things. What is the industry standard or what you're always hearing is factual. You have to carve your own way into your mixing process, and whether or not people like it, you'll find out. People are not shy about telling you how they feel about your stuff. If someone says that your drums sound like ass, they might. I've been told that. I worked on it. I like my drums now. The whole angry hands thing is not a fixer for bad mixing. It's not a fixer for anything, but it's a way to kind of get you into the door when it comes to figuring out what plugins do, figuring out what compression does, or figuring out what a saturator does, or what a certain knob does on an amplifier. This is kind of a signal for you if you are a novice, or even if you just haven't thought of this before, to go explore some plugins. If you're having trouble understanding what a certain thing is doing, even if it's a phaser on a guitar, go spin the depth. Go boost the mix. Just explore so you can understand what's happening. There are some insane mastering plugins out there that I have no idea what they're doing. But if I go mess with the knobs, I figure out if I like it or not. Half of the joy of mixing and producing is finding out what things do, and there are a lot of happy accidents that happen. I'm sure the first person that stacked 6 compressors on a vocal didn't know that it was gonna make it awesome. Not that people do that, but I do too. And I know some amazing mixers that do the 2 compressor or even more things, so I know it's not dumb. If you like what you saw here today, you want to see more of it, you have questions about it, subscribe. Hit me up on my socials. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, or if you've experienced similar things in your journey with mixing, as doing your angry hands or messing with any other weird philosophies. If you want to learn how to mix, or if you want to learn more from me on a one-to-one level, I offer lessons. I'm a strong believer that you can learn something from anybody, even if they're not perfectly fitting your style. I've learned phenomenal things from rap producers. I don't really produce rap all that often, but I've learned phenomenal things about bass control from people who produce hip hop. I go on YouTube and find other people's pages on a daily basis to try to learn as much as I can about anything that I don't know about. If you made it to the end of the video, I really appreciate you. If you could subscribe and help out our channel so we can grow, and get more people involved with learning about mixing and enjoying some of my other challenge videos about making songs and songwriting. For now, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I've been Josh with MoreDeadRecords. Bye.